Hegseth, it was a tie, bipartisan opposition, smallest margin since the job was created. You had to break that tie. If the nominee can't unite your party, how's he going to lead 3 million people?
Well, look, I think Pete is a disruptor, and a lot of people don't like that disruption.
Flashback.
We issued a statement, and you can read it.
Are you disappointed that he was confirmed tonight?
Which way was going?
Straight ahead.
This way?
Yes, sir.
Do you think that there's anything else that could have been done?
Was this a hard decision to come to, Senator?
Did you have any direct conversations with Hegseth today? Thank you, Senator.
But Margaret, that disruption is incredibly necessary. If you think about all of those bipartisan massive votes, we have to ask ourselves, what did they get us? They got us a country where we fought many wars over the last 40 years, but haven't won a war about as long as I've been alive. They've got us a military with a major recruitment crisis, a procurement price crisis that's totally dysfunctional, where we buy airplanes for billions and billions of dollars, terrible cost overruns, the delivery dates are always delayed. So we need a big change. Now, admittedly, there are people who don't like that big change, but it is necessary, and it's explicitly what Donald J. Trump ran on, and I think part of the reason why the American people elected him their 47th president. So
the main objective is changing all of that, that it's going to be Pete Hegseth alone?
I'd say the main problem the main thing that we want Pete Hegseth to do is to fix the problems at the Department of Defense. And unfortunately, there are many. We've gotten into way too many wars.
Flashback.
So I thought we were supposed to get a peaceful transfer of power, but it's looking like another resistance. Biden's sabotaging Trump's plan to end the Ukraine war. He's handing Zelensky long-range American-made missiles, and he's shooting them deep into Russia. Now Putin's putting the nuclear option on the table. So before Trump even gets into office, he's going to have to wiggle his way out of World War III. Plus, Joe's sending every last dollar into Ukraine and billions more to his green buddies to build windmills and chargers. And now he's putting together a high-speed conveyor belt for migrants to come in before Trump does. He's giving, you remember the Open Table for Illegals app? It's getting an upgrade. Biden's new app lets Jose and Maria stay in the country and skip having to check in with ICE. It's really just an app to make illegals invisible. It's like an app to keep them in the shadows, so Tom Homan has a harder time finding them. This after DA Alvin Bragg's assistant just got mugged by an illegal Venezuelan gangbanger with a lengthy rap sheet. Meanwhile, Democrat governors and mayors are building a wall. But it's not the kind of wall you think. They're building walls of cops around their cities to keep ICE out.
We're not going to cooperate. We're not going to ask our police force to serve as ICE agents.
Come on, yeah.
We're not going to do that. We're going to do everything in our power to protect people in this city. Everything. So in other words, we will do whatever is necessary.
It's unlawful. You can't use the military. You can't do mass deportations. We're not going to do that.
So, and the mayor of Denver says you're going to see Tiananmen Square like resistance. What does that mean? ICE agents are going to show up to Denver and they're going to get into a Mexican standoff with the local sheriff? Liberals are going to stand in front of ICE vans? What, to protect illegal rapists from getting picked up and flown home? ICE agents aren't calling the mayor of Denver and saying, you know, we're coming to 16th Street tomorrow at 7 o'clock to round up Biden migrants. No. It's not happening that way. These federal fugitive teams are going to show up whenever they want, wherever they want, and local yokel liberals aren't going to have a clue. No one's stopping that.
We've gotten into way too many misadventures that we shouldn't have got into in the very first place. And our procurement process, Margaret, is incredibly broken. We're in an era.
Decisions.
Well, of course, they're policy decisions, but they're also logistical and implementation decisions. If you look at where we are with the rise of artificial intelligence, with the rise of drone technology and drone warfare, we have to really, top to bottom, change the way that we fund the procurement of weapons, the way that we arm our troops. This is a major period of disruption, and we think Pete Hegseth is the guy to lead the job. Now, there's another element to this, Margaret, too, which is we believe that military morale, at least until the election of President Trump, was historically low. You had the Army missing recruitment goals by tens of thousands of soldiers, and already recruitment is starting to pick up because Pete Hegseth is fundamentally a warfighter's leader at the Department of Defense. He is a guy who sees not through the perspective of the generals or the bureaucrats. He looks at things through the perspective of the men and women that we send off to fight in our wars.
Both the Wall Street Journal and the National Review, conservative publications, as you know, have been critical of Tulsi Gabbard. The Review called her an atrocious nominee who deserves to be defeated. They compared her defense of Edward Snowden, the fugitive who stole U.S. secrets, to an attorney general who thinks the mob gets a bad rap. Her refusal to accept U.S. intelligence findings that Assad gassed his own people, they said, was like a nominee for OMB director not being able to count. Does any of this give you pause putting her in charge of the U.S. intelligence community? Yes or no?
No, Margaret, look, these are publications that attacked Donald J. Trump obsessively, but those publications don't determine who the president is, the American people do.
Flashback.
I want to bring the conversation back to the broken criminal justice system that is disproportionately negatively impacting black and brown people all across this country today. Now, Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And she fought to keep cash bail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Senator Harris, your response.
As the elected Attorney General of California, I did the work of significantly reforming the criminal justice system of a state of 40 million people, which became a national model for the work that needs to be done. And I am proud of that work. And I am proud of making a decision to not just give fancy speeches or be in a legislative body and give speeches on the floor, but actually doing the work of being in the position to use the power that I had to reform a system that is badly in need of reform. That is why we created initiatives that were about reentering former offenders and getting them counseling. It is why, and because I know that criminal justice system is so broken, that I am an advocate for what we need to do to not only decriminalize, but legalize marijuana in the United States.
I want to bring Congresswoman Gabbard back in. Your response,
The bottom line is, Senator Harris, when you are in a position to make a difference and an impact in these people's lives, you did not. And worse yet, in the case of those who were on death row, innocent people, you actually blocked evidence from being revealed that would have freed them until you were forced to do so. There is no excuse for that. And the people who suffered under your reign as prosecutor, you owe them an apology.
Senator Harris.
My entire career, I have been personally opposed to the death penalty, and that has never changed. And I dare anybody who is in a position to make that decision, to face the people I have faced, to say, I will not seek the death penalty. That is my background. That is my work. I am proud of it. I think you can judge people by when they are under fire, and it's not about some fancy opinion on a stage, but when they're in the position to actually make a decision, what do they do? When I was in the position of having to decide whether or not to seek a death penalty on cases I prosecuted, I made a very difficult decision that was not popular to not seek the death penalty. History shows that, and I am proud of those decisions.
The lie detector determined that was a lie.
I would not be standing here were it not for the education I received. And I know many of us will say the same thing. And I believe a child going without an education is tantamount to a crime. So I decided I was going to start prosecuting parents for truancy. Well, this was a little controversial in San Francisco. And frankly, my staff went bananas. They were very concerned because we didn't know at the time whether I was going to have an opponent in my re-election race. But I said, look, I'm done. This is a serious issue, and I've got a little political capital, and I'm going to spend some of it. And this is what we did. We recognized that in that initiative, as a prosecutor and law enforcement, I have a huge stick. The school district has got a carrot. Let's work in tandem around our collective objective and goal, which is to get those kids in school. So, to that end, on my letterhead, now let me tell you something about my letterhead. When you're the DA of a major city in this country, Usually the job comes with a badge. And there is often an artistic rendering of said badge on your stationery. So I sent a letter out on my letterhead to every parent in the school district, outlining the connection that was statistically proven between elementary school truancy, high school dropouts, who will become a victim of crime, and who will become a perpetrator of crime. We sent it out to everyone. A friend of mine actually called me and he said, Kamala, my wife got the letter. She freaked out. She brought all the kids into the living room, held up the letter, said, if you don't go to school, Kamala's going to put you and me in jail. Yes, we achieved intended effect. I intend to fight for Black Lives Matter.
If Black Lives matter to her, why didn't I matter?
Because of truancy, California public schools lose $1.4 billion a year in funding. I want money.
She had me arrested and prosecuted because my handicapped daughter was sick in the hospital and had missed some days of school. My message to all Americans, do not trust Kamala Harris.
I'm actually a permanent resident here, a first-generation immigrant and college student. I moved here from the Philippines in 2018, and I just wanted to share my thoughts about what's happening in our border. With illegal immigrants moving, crossing our border every day, that's a big problem for us legal immigrants here. It's a big disrespect for us, for my parents and me, who spent thousands and thousands of dollars, waited years and years for just to come here. Tulsi and Charlie, thank you for all your hard work. Thank you for representing the unity movement. And Tulsi, you are my role model, and you inspired me to be a strong, independent woman.
You may not be able to vote right now, but you got a loud voice and a powerful story. Make sure you share it with as many people as you can.
It is a disgrace to your family that people who cut in line are given benefits. We need to reward good behavior and punish bad behavior.
And Donald J. Trump is the person who determines who his cabinet is, not these publications that I think, frankly, have lost relevance.
The Senate will ultimately decide.
Well, the Senate will provide advice and consent, as is its constitutional obligation, but I feel confident that Tulsi Gabbard will ultimately get through. Two things that are important to know about Tulsi. First of all, she is a career military servant who's had a classification at the highest levels for nearly 2 decades. She has impeccable character, impeccable record of service, and she also is a person who I think is going to bring some trust back to the intelligence services. The bureaucrats at our intelligence services have gotten completely out of control. They've been part of the weaponization of our political system, the weaponization of our justice system. We need to have good intelligence services who keep us safe, but part of that is restoring trust in those services, and we think Tulsi is the right person to do it. That's
she
why the
doesn't
president,
trust those intelligence services.
She recognizes that the bureaucrats have gotten out of control, and we need somebody there who's going to rein them in and return those services to their core mission of identifying information that's going to keep us safe.
You campaigned on lowering prices for consumers. We've seen all of these executive orders. Which one lowers prices?
We have done a lot, and there have been a number of executive orders that have caused already jobs to start coming back into our country, which is a core part of lowering prices. More capital investment, more job creation in our economy is one of the things that's going to drive down prices for all consumers, but also raise wages so that people can afford to buy the things that they need. If you look at our slate of executive orders, no, Margaret, prices are going to come down, but it's going to take a little bit of time.
Flashback.
We're going to take another question from the audience. Maybe the only job in the country harder than being president of the United States is being a mom, especially under this administration, because they're making everything harder. And tonight we have a mom here in the audience, Barbara, that's behind us, that has a question for you.
Hi, Barbara. Hello back there.
Good evening. Good evening, President Trump. Thank you for taking our question.
Thank you.
My name is Barbara. I'm a mom of 3, a grandmother of 7, and 3 great-grands, a registered nurse, retired nurse. So I know the cost that goes into raising children and running a household.
Yeah.
People just can't survive now. How are you going to bring down the cost of food and groceries?
Good. Very good. Thank you. So we have to start always with energy. Always. I don't want to be boring about it, but there's no bigger subject. It covers everything. If you make donuts, if you make cars, whatever you make, energy is a big deal, and we're going to get that. It's my ambition to get your energy bill within 12 months down 50%. If I can do that, you've done a hell of a job. 5-0, not 15, 50. Interest rates are going to follow, and actually they're going to follow for another reason. The economy is now not good, and interest rates, you'll see they'll do the rate cut and all the political stuff tomorrow, I think. And, you know, will he do a half a point? Will he do a quarter of a point? But the reason is because the economy is not good. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to do it. But we're going to get interest rates down, and we got to work with our farmers. Our farmers are being decimated right now.
Right? The president has been president for all of 5 days. I think that in those 5 days, he's accomplished more than Joe Biden did in 4 years. It's been an incredible breakneck pace of activity. We're going to work with Congress. We're, of course, going to have more executive orders, and we're going to try the way that you lower prices is that you encourage more capital investment into our country. And you ask specifically what executive order is going to help lower prices. All of the stuff that we've done on energy, to explore more energy reserves, to develop more energy resources in the United States of America. One of the main drivers of increased prices under the Biden administration is that we had a massive increase in energy prices. Donald Trump has already taken multiple executive actions that are going to lower energy prices, and I do believe that means consumers are going to see lower prices at the pump and at the grocery store, but it's going to take a little bit of time. Rome wasn't built in a day, and while we've done a whole lot, we can't undo all of the damage of Joe Biden's presidency in 4 days.
Well, there are a lot of things that contributed to higher energy prices, and there was record oil and gas production.
Yes, Joe Biden did many terrible things to lead to an increase in prices. I agree, Margaret.
No, but all the things you experience at the grocery store are what people touch and feel. That's what you were talking about, bacon on the campaign trail.
Of course, of course.
Those things, when do consumers actually get to touch and feel a difference in their life?
Flashback.
How are you going to bring down the cost of food and groceries?
We have to start always with energy. Always. I don't want to be boring about it, but there's no bigger subject. It covers everything. If you make donuts, if you make cars, whatever you make, energy is a big deal, and we're going to get that. It's my ambition to get your energy bill within 12 months down 50%.
Well, Margaret, how does bacon get to the grocery store? It comes on trucks that are fueled by diesel fuel. If the diesel's way too expensive, the bacon's going to become more expensive. How do we grow the bacon? Our farmers need energy to produce it. So if we lower energy prices, we are going to see lower prices for consumers, and that is what we're trying to fight for.
Well, the flurry of executive orders, most of them weren't about the economy. Many of them
were, though, Margaret. We had, I think we've
a
taken
promise
over
of tariffs by February 1st.
We've taken over 200 executive actions, some executive orders, other executive actions. Again, this is in less than a week, and a lot of them were focused on the economy, bringing investment into our country and lowering energy prices. We've also focused on safety, restoring public safety, ending weaponization of the Department of Justice. We've done a lot. And I think the president is to be commended for actually coming in and doing something with this incredible mandate the American people gave him. He's not sitting in the Oval Office doing nothing. He's doing the American people's business.
Meanwhile,
week one of Donald Trump's second presidency, and a lot has happened. On Monday, he was sworn in.
I was saved by God to make America great again.
2 more speeches, a rally, and a press conference would follow. And executive orders, 26 of them. Some signed at the rally with pens thrown to the crowd, others signed in the Oval Office. They brought a declaration of a national emergency on the US border with Mexico, pardons for many involved in January the 6th, withdrawal from the World Health Organization, withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement, the Gulf of Mexico renamed the Gulf of America, and restrictions eased on oil and gas exploration, or as Mr. Trump put it, drill, baby, drill. There was this too.
There are only 2 genders, male and female.
And the President's Day ended with 3 balls and some dancing to YMCA with a sword. Tuesday brought another pardon of Russ Ulbricht. Trump called those who'd prosecuted him scum. it was announced all government diversity staff would be put on paid leave. On Wednesday, Trump called on Putin to stop the ridiculous war in Ukraine, or Russia would face sanctions. Then on TV, the president appeared to hint Joe Biden could be prosecuted. And on security protection, former Trump Secretary of State Mike Pompeo had his revoked. So had former National Security Advisor John Bolton. Thursday brought another speech. Tariffs were mentioned, as was the idea of Canada becoming part of the US.
I say you can always become a state. Then if you're a state, we won't have a deficit.
In Seattle, a federal judge blocked Trump's executive order to ban birthright citizenship. And the president ordered documents on the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr. to be declassified.
That's a big one, huh?
The week ended with images of deportation flights. Anthony Fauci, who led the US response to COVID, had his security revoked, and the president left Washington for California and North Carolina. In his inauguration speech, Donald Trump had declared,
"The golden age of America begins right now."
However you describe the Trump presidency, it's definitely begun.
And I think they're going to see a lot of good effects from it.
Well, a lot of these announcements have yet to take effect.
Sure.
The president did say he wants to do something with an executive order in relation to federal emergency response. He said he may reform or eliminate FEMA. Instead of sending emergency responders, he may start to send a percentage of money to states to take care of themselves. But, you know, FEMA has specialized expertise that some of these states just don't have.
Flashback.
Another issue that highlighted the incompetency of Joe Biden was hurricane relief and FEMA's reaction, right?
Yeah.
And you know, Joe Biden was in charge, but Kamala Harris was running, and there was there was an avoidance of wanting to talk about how significant the impact is on so many communities based on two hurricanes. Now, according to the Daily Wire, this is a staggering story. FEMA officials, so, you know, which should be helping everybody, directed hurricane relief workers in Florida to avoid certain homes that had Trump signs in their lawn. Okay, here's the report according to the Daily Wire. A FEMA supervisor told workers in a message to avoid homes advertising Trump as they canvassed Lake Placid, Florida, to identify residents who could qualify for federal aid. Internal messages viewed by the Daily Wire reveal. The supervisor, Marnie Washington, relayed this message both verbally and in group chat used by the relief team. Multiple government employees told the Daily Wire. So now hurricane relief also politicized.
A few moments later.
I'm sorry. No, this is the last one. Okay. I'm sorry. That's all right. I'm really conflicted. I have a lot more stuff to give, but I am not a fan of Donald Trump. So these signs are a problem for me. So I'm going to have to think about it. Okay. Thanks.
Oh, Margaret,
in their arsenal. And
I wish
how
that they...
will states who are lower income states, the Mississippis, the Kentuckys, the Alabamas, be able to do this for themselves without federal help?
Well, the president, to be clear, is not saying we're going to leave anybody behind. He's saying that in the way that we administer these resources, some of which is coming from the federal level, some of which is coming from the state level, we've got to get the bureaucrats out of the way and get the aid to the people who need it most.
But these
Let's
are the
be
first
honest,
responders.
Margaret, you talk about the expertise from FEMA. FEMA in North Carolina, in California, in Florida with some of the hurricanes has often been a disaster. And it's not because we don't have good people at FEMA, it's because bureaucratic red tape and garbage prevents the rapid deployment of resources to the people who need it most.
But the states are now going to have to do this themselves?
The president is trying to encourage us to reform the way that we deliver emergency response in a way that gets resources to the people who need it.
So don't take him literally, is what you're saying.
We should take the president at his word that FEMA needs desperate reform, because it does. Margaret, when I went to North Carolina as VP-elect, but before we were sworn in, people would talk about how FEMA would get resources, food, medicine, water to a warehouse, but then would have no plan to get it from the warehouse to the people in the mountains who were literally starving and thirsting to death.
All right, in a News Nation exclusive, we headed to the hardest hit communities near Asheville, North Carolina, after the devastating hurricane damage. Families there lost their homes and are now living in tent cities, struggling to stay warm, many without power or even bathrooms. Residents say they feel like they've been left behind and forgotten, waiting for government funding so they can rebuild their lives. News Nation's senior national correspondent Brian Enton joins us now live from Swannanoa, North Carolina, with more. Brian, what have you heard from the folks living down there?
Yeah, Elizabeth, until you get down here on the ground and see it for yourself, it's hard to believe just how devastated this area still is. In Asheville, they still don't have drinkable water. In towns like Swannanoa, where we are, it's just still a total mess. 100,000 people, that's just the estimate, either had very badly damaged or destroyed homes. And we found coming here that many of them still have nowhere to go. Driving around the outskirts of Asheville, it's hard to decide where to even begin. There's just so much hurricane damage, literally everywhere you look. I got a message on X from a woman named Sarah. I want to show you. It says, "Hi, I'm in Swannanoa, North Carolina, one of the hardest hit towns. We lost our home due to the hurricane. We're getting barely any help."
Nice to meet you.
I met Sarah outside the trailer she's living in with her husband, 2 kids, 2 cats, and 2 dogs. Like almost everyone here, their home was destroyed and condemned, and they also lost their cars and their jobs.
Everybody that I've talked to says they're getting no help.
Their trailer was donated by a volunteer, not FEMA, and they have to pay for their own porta potty.
I had to rent this so that we would even be able to use the bathroom.
So you have to pay for that yourself?
Yes. Yeah, it's $130 a month to rent one.
Sarah's one hope was a U.S. Small Business Administration disaster loan. But then she got this voicemail.
This is a call from the U.S. Small Business Administration about your SBA disaster loan application. Due to a lapse in congressional funds, new loan offers will be delayed until Congress provides additional funding for the disaster loan program. We understand how frustrating this delay is.
What did you think when you heard that?
You know, it's been, we already have it so rough, and to not be able to get the financial and, you know, help that we need it's really awful.
Some just down the road have it even more awful, living in tents and small RVs with no power as winter approaches and temperatures now dip into the 30s.
There's times we don't get fresh meat because there's no way to keep it cold. Because you got to choose between heating the house with a generator, especially the ones who have kids, and keeping the food cold.
Wintertime's coming. These folks cannot be forgot about. Just because you don't see this on TV, it don't just go away. This is not going to go away for a long time. We got to get those folks out of those tents and in those FEMA campers. How's it going to happen?
A lot of the locals I've spoken to are particularly upset about a FEMA compound they say is much nicer than the donated trailers that they are staying in. It's hard to see, but this right here, I'm going to slow down, is the entrance to the compound. There's a lot of security. The public can't go in. We drove up onto a hill behind the compound for a better view, and you see how massive it is. A sea of government trailers. It's so organized and secure, so different from how the people we met are living here.
FEMA's not connecting with the county's not connecting with the state, and you got this big rat race.
Volunteers like combat veteran Robbie Ammons say housing is the biggest issue, and red tape. Families left in tents and RVs because of the permitting process, he says.
Next week, temperatures are going to start getting in the 30s at night. We're afraid of more hypothermia, folks that are living in the mountains, and there's probably going to be more bodies laying around if we don't start getting these people in some level of temporary housing.
The cold really is the big concern here, Elizabeth. That woman in the piece who played the voicemail, we reached out. She was trying to get that disaster loan. We reached out to the SBA. They said they did run out of money on October 15th. They're trying to work with Congress to get more funding. Her situation is desperate. She has to bundle her little kids up to take them out to that porta potty when they have to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. And she was offered some rental assistance from FEMA, but she says there's nowhere to rent. Everything is destroyed, or the few places are too expensive, or they won't take a bunch of kids and dogs and cats and the animals she has, and she doesn't want to move 2 hours away. So it's a real mess out here, Elizabeth.
We can do so much better, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we will.
But they work with the state and local officials.
They often don't work well enough. And again, that's not
going to be
because
on the state
of
and local officials?
the FEMA management officials don't work well enough with state and local officials to get resources to the people who need it. We should expect, and this is, I think, one of the fundamental premises of President Trump's leadership, the American people should expect more of their government. When there's a terrible disaster, they should expect food, medicine, and water to get to the people who need it. When there's a terrible fire in California, the fire hydrants ought to actually turn on.
Flashback.
Mr. President, my name is Joel Pollack, and I am a journalist with Breitbart News, but I happen to live in the Pacific Palisades, as do other colleagues. One colleague, John Kahn, wrote the song Fighter, which you played at your campaign rallies. He lost his house and the studio he wrote that song in. We were lucky because I was able to fight the fire on my fence. But when I got to my house, there was no water in the pipes. So I got inside and I picked up the flower vases because I give my wife flowers every week, and there was water there, and we started with that. Then I found my son's bucket of baseballs, and I dumped the baseballs on the ground, and I used the bucket. But there was still no water, except for the water in the gutter coming from the burnt homes uphill. So I went to and fro to my gutter and my fence with my bucket. 2 guys showed up in a truck, 2 neighbors. We found 2 more buckets, bucket after bucket after bucket. Many of my neighbors, including some here, tried to fight the fires. They couldn't. We were lucky our house was saved. But we should not have to rely on buckets to put out a fire.
That's right.
You can't stop an 80-mile-per-hour wind or 100-mile-per-hour wind, but there were many things that went wrong here that are basic and small. We did not have traffic police to guide the evacuation, so there was gridlock on Sunset. They've removed the vehicles now, but there were dozens of vehicles that were abandoned by drivers who fled for their lives because there were no traffic cops available. The fire department wasn't pre-deployed, even though there was an extreme wind event coming. And many of my neighbors lost their fire insurance in the days before the blaze. So I asked my neighbors, what would they want to know if I could ask the president a question? And the number one thing was insurance. Can you work with the insurance companies to get people back to where they were before they lost the coverage because of California's regulations? And can you make California change its rules so that when we build again, we can get fire insurance and we don't have to worry? And there's one other point I want to make. I really appreciate my congressman advocating for money. We need the money from the federal government. But I also understand Americans who are tired of spending money on California and disasters happen, and the California government passes $50 million to oppose your policy. So they have $50 million for that, but not for moving people into rental homes or helping people relocate or rebuild. I would like to ask you to follow the 9/11 Commission precedent and appoint a special master to watch the money, to make sure that every federal dollar that gets spent here is spent on fire relief and rebuilding and not on everything else.
I am sick of the American people having such low expectations for their government. They should demand more of us because this is the greatest country in the world, and that's what Donald Trump's leadership promises to bring back.
So still count on the federal government, but watch that space. Let me ask you about another area that you campaigned on quite a lot, and there was a flurry of activity on, and that has to do with immigration.
Sure.
The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops this week condemned some of the executive orders signed by President Trump, specifically those allowing immigration and customs enforcement to enter churches and to enter schools. Do you personally support the idea of conducting a raid or enforcement action in a church service, at a school?
Well, let me address this. Of course, if you have a person who is convicted of a violent crime, whether they're an illegal immigrant or a non-illegal immigrant, you have to go and get that person to protect the public safety. That's not unique to immigration. But let me just address this particular issue, Margaret, because as a practicing Catholic, I was actually heartbroken by that statement. And I think that the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops needs to actually look in the mirror a little bit and recognize that when they receive over $100 million to help resettle illegal immigrants, are they worried about humanitarian concerns, or are they actually worried about their bottom line? We are going to enforce immigration law. We're going to protect the American people.
Every time you enter this country illegally, you violated a crime under Title 8, United States Code 1325. It's a crime. So if you're in the country illegally, you got a problem. And that's why I'm hoping those who are in the country illegally who have not been ordered removed by the federal judge should leave.
While you are emphasizing that you go after national security threats, you have said no one's off the table. If you're in the country illegally, you better be looking over your shoulder. You should be afraid and start packing now. Is that what you're doing to get hotel workers out or people working on farms, that they'll be so scared they just leave?
Look, I think if you're in the country illegally, it's not okay. It's not okay to violate laws of this country. We have millions of people standing in line, taking the test, doing their background investigation, paying the fees that want to come in the right way.
All of the people who were arrested on day one, as far as you know, convicted criminals or those who had been arrested before?
No. And let me explain that. There are collateral arrests. Where do collateral arrests happen? Sanctuary cities. And this is important we understand that. Sanctuary cities lock us out of the jails. So instead of ICE being able to arrest the bad guy, the criminal alien, in the safety and security of the jail where the officer's safe, the alien's safe, and the public's safe, sanctuary cities release them back in the community, which endangers the community, putting the criminal alien back in the community. But when we find him, he's going to be with others, most likely. Many times they're with others. If they're in the country illegally, they're coming too.
You talk about these numbers expanding. 500 the first day. What do you think you can get up to?
As many as we can get.
I want to go back to who you're deporting. Aside from the long list of executive actions, the administration said it will no longer tell ICE agents they have to avoid sensitive locations, including schools, hospitals, churches. Benjamin Huffman, the acting Homeland Security Secretary, said in a statement, criminals will no longer be able to hide in America's schools and churches to avoid arrest. What criminals are hiding in schools?
Look,
middle schools, elementary schools. You going to go into those?
How many MS-13 members are at age 14 to 17? Many of them. So, look, if it's a national security threat, public safety threat, and what you need to understand is a case by case. Name another agency, another law enforcement agency that has those type of requirements that they can't walk into a school or a doctor's office or on a medical campus. No other agencies have those standards. These are well-trained officers with a lot of discretion, and when it comes to the sensitive location, there's still going to be supervisory review. So it's not like it's an open issue, but ICE officers should have discretion to decide if a national security threat or a public safety threat is in one of these facilities, then there should be an option for them to make the arrest.
But someday you could go into those schools and grab people who are just in the country illegally.
On a case-by-case basis, depending who they are, what the circumstances are. It's never a zero game.
You know that this creates fear in the immigrant community. The chair of the U.S. Conference of Bishops Committee said turning places of care, healing, and solace into places of fear and uncertainty for those in need while endangering the trust between pastors, providers, educators, and the people they serve will not make our communities safer.
Well, look, here's I think. If Congress has a job to do, we're enforcing the laws Congress enacted and the president signed. If they don't like it, change the law. I find it hard to believe any member of Congress is telling us not to enforce the law that they enacted and they fund us to do.
But opening up to anyone who's in the country illegally and going into schools and grabbing them, does that, kids, adults?
The message needs to be clear. There's consequences for entering the country illegally. If we don't show there's consequences, you're never going to fix the border.
Yeah.
Donald Trump promised to do that, and I believe the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, if they're worried about the humanitarian costs of immigration enforcement, let them talk about the children who have been sex trafficked because of the wide open border of Joe Biden.
You personally
let them talk
support
about
them going into
people like
schools
Laken
and
Riley
churches.
who were brutally murdered. I support us doing law enforcement against violent criminals, whether they're illegal immigrants or anybody else, in a way that keeps us safe. Let me ask this question, Margaret. Let's separate the immigration issue. If you had a violent murderer in a school, of course I want law enforcement to go and get that person out.
I'm not going back to Haiti. Well, he's wrong. He's going back to Haiti.
Of course.
So what's the point of the question?
you changed the regulation this week. That's the point of the question.
Exactly.
Giving the authority to go into churches and go into schools.
We empowered law enforcement to enforce
but
the
that
law
also
everywhere
has
to protect Americans.
Effect, a chilling effect, arguably, to people to not send their kids to school.
I desperately hope it has a chilling effect on illegal immigrants
you think the
coming into our
U.S. Conference
country.
of Catholic Bishops are actively hiding criminals?
I think the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops has frankly not been a good partner in common sense immigration enforcement that the American people voted for. And I hope, again, as a devout Catholic, that they'll do better.
There are 5 legal challenges already to one of the other immigration actions, the order on birthright citizenship. A federal judge appointed by Ronald Reagan, I think you'd agree, has some conservative credentials, paused the order to end birthright citizenship, calling it blatantly unconstitutional. How do you reconcile this challenge to the 14th Amendment to the Constitution?
So I obviously disagree with that judge, and these things, some of them will be litigated. That's the nature of our constitutional system. But here's the basic idea of President Trump's view on this. If you are a lawful permanent resident or a legal immigrant who plans to stay, your children, of course, should become American citizens. But let's say you're the child of an ambassador. You don't become...
But that's not part of it.
Well, that is
already a carve-out
an
having to deal
important
with kids of
principle.
diplomats.
But we're saying that carve-out should apply to anybody who doesn't plan to stay here. If you come here on vacation and you have a baby in an American hospital, that baby doesn't become an American citizen. If you're an illegal alien and you come here temporarily, hopefully, your child does not become an American citizen by virtue of just having been born on American soil.
So the first thing I want to say is I agree with everything. The Republicans on the stage are on the right side of this issue. Militarize the southern border, stop funding sanctuary cities, and end foreign aid to Mexico and Central America to end the incentives to come across. But I do go a step further. You're right about that, Ilya. I favor ending birthright citizenship for the kids of illegal immigrants in this country. Now, the left will howl about the Constitution and the 14th Amendment. The difference between me and them is I've actually read the 14th Amendment. What it says is that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the laws and jurisdiction thereof are citizens. So nobody believes that the kid of a Mexican diplomat in this country enjoys birthright citizenship. Not a judge or legal scholar in this country will disagree with me on that. Well, if the kid of a Mexican diplomat doesn't enjoy birthright citizenship, then neither does the kid of an illegal migrant who broke the law to come here. And as the father of 2 sons, it is hard for me to look them in the eye and say, you have to follow the law when our own government fails to follow its own laws. That's how we really go the distance and solve this problem and restore the rule of law in the United States of America, because that is part of what it even means to be an American.
It's a very basic principle in American immigration law that if you want to become an American citizen and you've done it the right way, and the American people and their collective wisdom have welcomed you into our national community, then you become a citizen. But temporary residents, people who come in here, whether legally or illegally, and don't plan to stay, their children shouldn't become American citizens. I don't know any country that does that or why we would be different.
Well, this is a country founded by immigrants.
Well, this is a country founded by...
This is a unique country.
This is a very unique country, and it was founded by some immigrants and some settlers, but just because we were founded by immigrants doesn't mean that 240 years later that we have to have the dumbest immigration policy in the world. No country says that temporary visitors, their children, will be given complete access to the benefits and blessings of American citizenship. America should actually look out for the interests of our citizens first, and that means, again, if you're here permanently and lawfully, your kid becomes an American citizen. If you're not here permanently, if you're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States and don't plan to be, why would we make those people's children American citizens permanently?